There is a battle of two wolves inside us all. The wolf that wins, the one you feed. Jack Bogle is the late founder of Vanguard Group. He is credited with popularizing the index fund, a way for people to get broad exposure to the market, or, if you listen to Mike Green, a ticking time bomb set to implode our financial markets. But anyway, besides the diversification provided by the approach, investors benefit by incurring fees much lower than what had previously been available from actively managed mutual funds. Many have been made wealthy by steadily depositing into these funds. Keith Gill looked at the large short position in GameStop and saw an opportunity. He bought shares and options and told the world that was stuck inside and online during COVID that with one simple trick, they could change the world. All they had to do was buy. He made tens of millions of dollars. Keith Gill was Roaring Kitty, and he was that kind of wolf. He didn't like the index, he liked the stock. Sometimes the hardest part about having a thesis like Keith Gill is not having the idea, it's seeing it to fruition. Because of this, studies have often shown that the best investors are dead, or more generally, people who just hold have better results than those who try to move in and out of positions. So, being dead is good, but what if I told you there was a way to have your investments perform like you were dead while actually being alive? It's called forgetting. In 2000, Massachusetts' Abandoned Property Division reached out to a Boston resident with some very good news. He was an idiot. The man had purchased 3,000 shares of EMC in 1987, shortly after the data storage company IPO'd. Then, at some point in the early 90s, he sold it all. Over the years, he'd see the company's stock price skyrocketing as technology came to dominate American industry and kick himself over not hanging on, except he had. It turned out that he had only sold 2,000 shares. The rest lay dormant in a brokerage account until it was deemed abandoned and given to the state. By the time he was informed, the 1,000 shares had grown via splits to represent 48,000 shares with a value of about $4 million, thanks in no small part to EMC putting up an insane 800x return from 1990 to 1999. Grace Groner was lucky, but in a different way. Upon graduating college in 1931, she secured a job at Abbot Labs as a secretary, and in that first year, she decided to make an investment. She bought 3 shares of Abbott stock for $60 each. Even adjusted for inflation, it's not a crazy amount of money, maybe slightly more than $3,000. Then she just held it and, crucially, reinvested the dividend. When you go to the Abbott Investor Relations page today, you will learn that, quote, Abbott has declared 399 consecutive quarterly dividends since 1924 and has increased the dividend payout for 51 consecutive years. Grace had picked a good place for her first job. Today, Abbott and its spin-off of AbbVie have a combined value of over $500 billion. She had also picked the right parents that gave her the genetics that allowed her to live to be 100. The compounding that took place over the 79 years between that initial $180 purchase and her death saw them grow into 100,000 shares worth $7.2 million, essentially all of which was donated to Lake Forest College. Now, women attending the college on her foundation scholarship get to live in the cottage she used to live in rather than the dorms, which is a pretty cool perk. And now for someone who truly fits the Roaring Kitty archetype, we turn to Rosario Mailino. The stock he liked was Qualcomm, and he liked it a lot. He got a tip from a rabbi in 1991 that began his journey of total and obsessive research into the telecommunications company which IPO'd that year. He read everything he could find and checked out newspaper employment sections to see if competitors were hiring. He tested every single generation of Qualcomm phone. When it was all said and done, Rosario, an anesthetist by trade, had packed $325,000 into the investment. This all happened at the beginning of an era where obsessed people could find people just like themselves. One of them, lawyer John Gorin, even drove to Texas to observe a patent fight involving Qualcomm. He then shared his legal opinion on Silicon Investor message board, which you can see here. For many of the stories on this channel, I continue to stress it's a miracle of a time capsule that needs to be preserved at all costs. The group were described differently from the people of GameStop, who popular media often portray as idiots, instead saying that they were, quote, a small gang of well-informed enthusiasts. They were early, though, so the eventual rewards were not without trials of faith. In 1996, Qualcomm was slapped with a business-threatening patent lawsuit from Ericsson, and the Wall Street Journal put a Stanford professor on the front page who alleged that Qualcomm had, quote, fundamental technical problems that they don't know how to solve. Those who held diamond-handed before it was a thing were rewarded. On March 25, 1999, the lawsuit with Ericsson was settled. No longer fighting, they would instead work together to implement a global solution for wireless communication. It was like a match was struck that would burn throughout the rest of the year. Analysts suddenly showed up in droves, with each one competing to put a higher price target. It's hard to keep up with what the stock price actually was throughout the year because there were multiple splits just in those 12 months. But it got one final obscene kick into the end of the year when an analyst announced that the price per share would be 1,000 when it was still under 500, a number that had been based on Qualcomm's royalties for the year 2010, more than a decade out. When it was all said and done, Qualcomm had appreciated 2,619% in a single year. Rosario found himself with $17 million in a car whose license plate read Go QCOM. Thankfully, he sold a quarter of the position before the bursting of the internet bubble and put it into bond funds, but he was a Qualcommer for life. He said, quote, I always want a portion of my portfolio in Qualcomm. And guess what? The best part of this story is that the man was not kidding. I looked him up on LinkedIn, and here's what he had to say 10 months ago. Qualcomm put me on the cover of Money magazine as the hottest stock in the market in February 2000. I am backing Qualcomm along with Nvidia as the most promising in AI. Wonderful company, always on the cutting edge. Go Qualcomm. To quote Dumbledore and Snape from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, after all this time, Rosario, always. He didn't just like the stock, he loves it. Thanks for watching, guys.